My wife called me the biggest regret of her life, while standing in the kitchen I had rebuilt so she could have a place to dream. The old house sat on a quiet street outside Asheville, with creaking oak floors, uneven plaster walls, and a back porch I had repaired 3 times because Caroline loved sitting there during summer rain. I had sanded those floors on my knees, rewired the kitchen after work, patched the roof before winter, and turned the small front room into her first real estate office when nobody in luxury property knew her name. That night, she stood under the warm pendant lights in a black cocktail dress from a broker event, arms crossed, eyes tired but certain, and looked at me like I was the last ugly piece in a room she had finally outgrown. "Marrying you was the biggest regret of my life, Adam," she said. Not shouted, not thrown in the middle of a fight. Spoken cleanly, like a conclusion she had reached after careful review. I was holding a folded invoice for the roof repair because the storm last week had opened another leak above her office. Even then, I had been fixing the house she was about to blame for making her feel trapped. I looked at the ring on my hand, then at the doorway where her heels had left faint marks on the floorboards I once told her were worth saving. "You do not mean that," I said, because some part of me still believed love could correct a sentence if it moved fast enough. Caroline's face did not soften. "I do," she said. "I look at this house, this life, this small version of everything, and all I can think is that I chose safety when I should have chosen more." More. That word had followed her home for 2 years. More listings, more money, more powerful clients, more polished rooms, more dinners with men like Preston Hale, who wore success like cologne and spoke about people as if they were assets to upgrade. He had told her she could become a symbol in luxury real estate if she stopped clinging to small, safe Adam. She never told me that directly. She did not have to. I heard it in the way she stopped inviting me to events, the way she corrected my shirt before clients arrived, the way she smiled at my sketches only when they could help her sell something. I looked around the kitchen, the reclaimed wood shelves, the hand-laid tile, the window seat she once cried over because I built it from scrap lumber for her birthday. Every corner held proof that I had loved her with tools, time, and patience. She looked at the same room and saw limitation. That was the night I understood we were no longer living in the same house. She saw a cage. I saw a history. And histories do not survive when one person starts calling them regret. Caroline did not cry after she said it. That was one of the cruelest parts. Tears would have given me something human to hold on to, some evidence that the sentence had cut her on the way out. Instead, she moved to the sink, took off one diamond earring, and placed it beside the faucet like the conversation was only another accessory from a long night she wanted to remove. "Preston says I keep confusing loyalty with fear," she said. I looked at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. "Preston says a lot for a man who never paid our mortgage." Her shoulders tightened. "That is exactly what I mean. You always make it about survival. Payments, repairs, practical things. I am tired of practical." I almost laughed, but the sound would have broken something in me, so I swallowed it. Practical was the word she used for every sacrifice after it stopped benefiting her pride. Practical was me working 14-hour days so she could leave a brokerage job she hated. Practical was me designing her first listing brochure when she could not afford a photographer. Practical was me turning our front room into an office with built-in shelves and a desk wide enough for open house folders. Practical was the reason she had a foundation sturdy enough to call boring. "You used to love this house," I said. Caroline turned, and for a second I saw exhaustion behind the polish. I loved what I thought it could become. The answer was honest enough to hurt more than a lie. 15 years earlier, we had stood on the front porch with a realtor who kept apologizing for the peeling paint and the crooked steps. Caroline walked through the empty rooms, touching cracked walls like they were wounded animals. She stopped in the kitchen, the old one with yellow counters and a stove that leaned to the left, and smiled at me with rain in her hair. "You make broken places feel possible," she said. I carried that sentence like a blueprint. I built our first decade around it. At night, after my architecture clients went home, I repaired windows, stripped wallpaper, replaced pipes, learned which parts of a marriage could be fixed with patience and which ones needed more light. Caroline sat on the floor with paint samples and dreams, talking about clients, listings, a name people would respect. I wanted that for her. When she got her first luxury showing, I stayed up until 2 in the morning helping her stage the foyer because she was too nervous to sleep. When she closed her first $1 million listing, I bought cheap champagne, and she drank it barefoot on the back porch, crying into my shoulder because she said nobody had ever believed in her the way I did. The problem was, belief is invisible after success arrives. People see the woman walking into the gala. They do not see the man repainting the office trim at midnight because the photographer comes at 8. Preston Hale saw the visible version of Caroline and told her she deserved visible things. A newer car, a bigger house, a husband who looked like he belonged beside floor-to-ceiling glass and private wine rooms. I became the part of her origin story she wanted edited down. "I am filing for separation," she said finally. The words were quiet, prepared, probably rehearsed in Preston's car or across some polished restaurant table where my name sounded small. I nodded once. That surprised her. She expected pleading. Maybe I had trained her to expect it. "I will have my attorney review whatever you send," I said. Her eyes searched my face, looking for the collapse she had already outgrown. I gave her none. Not because I felt strong, because the part of me that would have begged had just heard itself called regret and gone silent. The separation papers arrived 9 days later, folded inside a cream envelope that looked more elegant than anything ending A. Marriage had any right to look. Caroline had not moved out yet, but she had already begun treating the house like a listing she planned to stage after I disappeared. She cleared my drafting pencils from the kitchen drawer. She replaced the old porch chairs with sleek black ones that photographed better. She moved the framed picture of us from the hallway to the laundry room. Not hidden exactly, just demoted. That was how she ended things. Not with one dramatic blow, but by changing the room around you until you no longer belonged in it. Her attorney asked for the house, most of the furniture, and a clean public statement saying the separation was mutual and respectful. Mutual. Respectful. 2 words people use when they want the wound to look symmetrical. My attorney, David Mercer, read the proposal across from me in his Asheville office and looked over his glasses. "You know you do not have to give her the house." I looked out his window at the mountains, blue and quiet in the distance. She said it was part of her brand. David waited. Good attorneys know silence can reveal whether a man is being generous or bleeding. "Adam," he said, "do not confuse peace with surrender." I knew he was right. I also knew I was tired of fighting for rooms that had already rejected me through her eyes. So I kept the land parcel I had quietly purchased north of the city, the one Caroline once called impractical because it sat too far into the hills. I kept my architecture firm, my drawings, my savings, and the unfinished sketches she never cared enough to ask about. She kept the old house, the polished story, the front porch where she used to love me before loving me became bad for her image. When I came home that evening, Caroline was in the front room speaking to Preston on speaker while sorting fabric samples. She lowered the volume when she saw me, but not fast enough. "Once the paperwork is clean, we can reposition everything," Preston said. People admire reinvention. Reinvention. Another pretty word for leaving someone behind and calling it growth. Caroline ended the call and stood too quickly. "It is not what you think." I almost smiled. "You do not know what I think. Anymore." She looked at the envelope in my hand. "Did you sign?" "My attorney sent revisions." Her face tightened. "Adam, please do not make this harder than it has to be." There it was again. My pain was an inconvenience. My boundaries were difficulty. My cooperation was expected because for 15 years I had made difficult things easier for her. I walked past her into the kitchen, the same kitchen where she had named me her regret, and placed the envelope on the table. "I am not fighting you for the house," I said. Relief moved across her face before she could hide it. That hurt more than anger would have. "Thank you," she whispered. I nodded, but there was nothing generous in the silence that followed. "I am keeping the hill land." She frowned. "That empty property?" "Yes." "What are you even going to do with it?" I looked around the room I had rebuilt board by board, then at the woman who could not see value until someone wealthier named it. "Build something no one gets to call small," I said. She did not understand. Not then. She only heard a wounded man talking about land in the dark. But I already saw the gate. The divorce became final on a gray Thursday morning, in a courthouse room that smelled like old paper, coffee, and rain-soaked coats. Caroline wore a camel-colored blazer and pearls, the kind of outfit that made endings look professional. Preston waited for her downstairs, visible through the courthouse window beside a black Range Rover he probably wanted people to notice. I signed where David pointed, answered the judge's questions, and kept my voice calm enough that Caroline looked at me twice, as if waiting for the grief to misbehave. It did not. Grief had already done its screaming in private rooms, in motel showers, in the cab of my truck at 2 in the morning, and on the hill land where I stood alone with rolled-up drawings under my arm, learning how wind sounds when nobody is asking you to be useful. When the judge said it was done, Caroline touched the necklace at her throat and whispered, "I hope you find what you are looking for." I looked at her then, really looked, and saw that she believed she had given me a polite farewell. She had no idea she was speaking to a man who had already started building the answer. I moved into a rented cabin 6 miles from the hill property, small enough that my drafting table doubled as a dining table, and the heater clicked all night like it was arguing with the cold. Every morning, I drove up the gravel road before sunrise and walked the land with coffee in one hand and a notebook in the other. 22 acres of steep slope, pine, rock, and stubborn red clay. To Caroline, it had been empty. To me, it was quiet enough to hear myself again. I did not start with the house. I started with the gate. That might sound strange unless you have ever watched someone walk freely through your life just to insult the rooms you built for them. A gate is not only steel. It is a sentence. It says what enters now must be invited. I designed it in matte black iron, clean lines, no gold letters, no showy crest, just strength and restraint. Behind it, the driveway curved through trees so the house would not reveal itself too quickly. I wanted arrival to feel earned, not displayed. The main residence came later. Stone pulled from the property, warm cedar, glass facing the valley, a studio wing for my architecture firm, and a guest house tucked low against the trees. Contractors asked if I wanted the project photographed for marketing. I said no. For a while, I needed one thing in my life that was not built for applause. Months passed. Then a year. Then almost 2. Caroline's name still appeared in luxury real estate circles, but less brightly. Preston's post shifted from her listings to other women's projects, other investors, other rooms with better angles. I did not watch closely. Healing is not pretending you do not care. It is caring less often until the silence stops feeling forced. Whitaker Ridge began getting attention anyway. Not because I pushed it, but because work speaks when it is built well. A regional architecture magazine mentioned the estate. A private investor asked about a second phase. A broker called it the most quietly powerful residential project outside Asheville. Quietly powerful. I like that. One evening, standing beside the finished gate as the first lights came on along the driveway, I thought about the kitchen Caroline kept, the house I surrendered because she called it part of her brand, and the sentence she left me with. Biggest regret. I looked at the black steel, the stone pillars, the road bending toward a home no one had the right to belittle, and understood something simple. She had not cursed my future. She had only removed herself from the part of it she could no longer enter casually. By the second winter after the divorce, Whitaker Ridge had become the kind of name Caroline's world could not ignore. I learned that from a client, not from her. A developer from Charlotte flew in to walk the property, stood at the top of the drive with his hands in his coat pockets, and said, "Everybody is asking who designed this place." I looked past him toward the valley, where fog moved through the trees like the land was breathing. "The land did most of the work," I said. He smiled because he thought I was being modest. I was not. Broken places had always told me what they could become if someone listened long enough. That used to be what Caroline loved about me. Now it was what paid my bills without needing her approval. The main house was finished by then, warm at night behind glass, quiet in the morning, built with stone from the ridge and cedar that smelled clean after rain. My studio wing stayed full of drawings, models, and coffee cups. I hired 2 young architects who cared more about proportion than status, and for the first time in years, my work did not feel like proof I owed anyone. It felt like breath. Caroline, from what I heard, was not having the same kind of year. I did not ask. People told me anyway, because divorce turns your old life into weather reports other people think you need. Preston had moved on to a hotel redevelopment group in Miami, taking his Range Rover smile and his language about reinvention with him. Caroline lost 2 luxury listings after a market correction, then a third when a client chose a younger team with better social media numbers. The old house, the one she insisted was part of her brand, sat on the market for 5 months after she finally listed it. Buyers loved the kitchen, the porch, the The office, every detail my hands had left behind, but Caroline kept pricing it like regret should appreciate faster than reality. One afternoon, a broker I respected called about a private tour of Whitaker Ridge for a potential buyer. He did not mention Caroline's name. He did not have to. I heard it in the careful pause before he said the buyer was emotionally connected to the area. I said no. Not cruelly. Not triumphantly. Just no. Some doors do not open because the person outside finally learned how to knock. After that, the call stopped for a while. Then came the article. A regional design magazine ran a feature on Whitaker Ridge with photos taken from the Valley Road. Nothing inside the gate, just the stone pillars, the black steel, the cedar roofline visible through trees, and a headline about restraint, privacy, and Appalachian modern design. My phone filled with messages from clients and old colleagues. I ignored most of them until David Mercer sent one line. She has seen it. I stared at those 4 words longer than I should have. Not because I wanted Caroline to suffer. Because part of me knew that every board, stone, and beam out there carried a language she once understood before she traded meaning for image. That night, rain started after 11, soft at first, then steady against the glass. I was in the studio reviewing plans for the second phase when the gate camera chimed at 12:18 in the morning. I looked at the monitor and saw a dark car idling outside the black steel gate. Then the driver's door opened. Caroline stepped into the rain in a long beige coat, hair wet around her face, one hand holding her phone, the other pressed to her chest like she was trying to keep herself together. For a moment, I did not move. The gate lights cut through the rain and turned her into a ghost from a house I no longer owned. Then the intercom rang. Her voice came through thin and shaking. "Adam, please. I know it is late. I just need to talk." Outside, the gate stayed closed. I did not answer right away. Rain tapped against the studio windows, and Caroline's face filled the security monitor in grainy blue-gray light, older than the woman who had walked out of the courthouse beside Preston, softer than the woman who had stood in our old kitchen and called our life small. She looked toward the camera, then down at the wet gravel, then back toward the gate, as if the steel might recognize her before I did. "Adam," she said again through the intercom. "Please. I know I have no right to show up like this." That was the first true thing she had said in a long time. I stood in the studio with one hand resting on the desk, surrounded by models of homes I had designed after she left, homes built for people who wanted privacy, peace, and rooms that did not need applause to feel valuable. 2 years earlier, I would have opened the door before she finished saying my name. I would have grabbed a coat, driven down the hill, and made her tea while pretending the past could be folded neatly beside a fireplace. But 2 years is enough time for grief to learn where the locks are. I pressed the intercom button. "Why are you here, Caroline?" She closed her eyes when she heard my voice, and the rain slid down her face in a way that made it hard to tell what was weather and what was regret. "I saw the article," she said. Of course she had. Not "I missed you." Not "I am sorry." First, the article. First, the gate. First, the house hidden behind the trees. I let the silence stretch until she understood what her answer had revealed. She shook her head quickly. "No, that is not what I mean. I mean, I saw it and I knew. I knew it was you in every line of that place. The stone, the gate, the way the drive curves before the house appears. It was everything you used to draw at our kitchen table. Our kitchen table." The phrase landed softly and still hurt. "The table in the house you called a regret." I asked. Her mouth trembled. "I was cruel." "You were certain." That stopped her. Cruelty can sometimes ask to be forgiven as a mistake. Certainty has to answer for itself. Behind her, the dark car idled with its headlights dimmed. It was not Preston's Range Rover. It was a rented sedan, ordinary and temporary, the kind of car people use when the life they chose no longer sends a driver. Caroline wrapped her coat tighter. "Preston is gone," she said. "I heard. He left when things got hard. Men like that usually do." She flinched, not because I insulted him, but because I did not sound surprised. For a long moment, there was only rain, gate lights, and the low hum of the intercom. Then she said the words I think she had driven up the mountain to say. "I was wrong about you." I looked past the monitor toward the dark glass of the studio, where my own reflection stood over the drawings like a stranger who had survived something. "That is not the same as loving me," I said. Caroline covered her mouth, and this time the tears were clear. I know that now. I thought I wanted more, but I did not know I was leaving the only person who knew how to build anything real with me. My hand stayed near the gate control, but I did not touch it. The black steel on the monitor stood between us, not as punishment, but as proof. I had spent 2 years building a place her apology could not unlock. Caroline stood in the rain outside the gate, and I realized the hardest part of healing is not becoming strong enough to keep someone out. It is becoming honest enough to admit part of you still recognizes them when they come back broken. Her hand rested against the wet steel bars, not pushing, not demanding, just touching the boundary like she could feel the years I had spent putting it there. I know I cannot ask you to forget what I said, she whispered through the intercom. Then do not ask, I said. She looked up at the camera. I am asking you to let me try to repair it. Repair. That word used to belong to us. A cracked stair. A leaking roof. A warped cabinet door. A marriage. Back when I thought every damaged thing could be restored if you had the right tools and enough patience. I looked around the studio at the models, the drawings, the clean lines of homes designed after I stopped begging old rooms to love me back. You did not break a window, Caroline, I said. You named our whole life a mistake. Her face folded, but she did not turn away. I know. You called safety small because someone else made risk look expensive. She nodded once, rain dripping from her hair onto the collar of her beige coat. I know. You kept the house because it helped your brand, then sold pieces of our history to strangers who complimented the tile I laid. Her mouth trembled. I could not stay there after you left. That answer surprised me, but not enough to save her. You left first, I said. The gate lights flickered in the rain, and beyond the monitor I could see the rail gate far down the drive, black against the trees, holding its shape in the weather. Caroline took a breath that shook. I thought I was choosing a bigger life. Preston kept saying you were safe, and I started hearing safe as ordinary. Then everything I thought was bigger turned temporary. The clients, the parties, the people who smiled when my numbers were high. They all moved on so fast. I closed my eyes for a second. There it was. The wound behind the vanity. She had not only wanted more. She had feared becoming less. Fear can explain a betrayal without excusing it. I pressed the intercom again. So why come here tonight? She looked toward the driveway beyond the gate, toward the warm house lights hidden through the trees. Because when I saw this place, I finally understood what I threw away. Not the money, not the gate. You. The way you see things before anyone else sees value. The way you stay. The way you build. My hand hovered near the gate control. Not close enough to press. Close enough to remember how easy it used to be to let her in. Do you want me? I asked. Or do you want shelter from a life that stopped clapping? She cried then, openly, shoulders shaking under the rain. But she did not answer quickly. That mattered. The old Caroline would have reached for the prettiest sentence. This one stood outside the gate and let the ugly question do its work. I do not know how to separate them yet, she said at last. Honest. Late. Painful. I stepped back from the console. Then you are not ready to come in. Her face changed, not with anger, but with the shock of a door staying closed after the truth was finally spoken. Adam, please. I picked up my coat from the chair. I will come down to the gate, I said, but I am not opening it tonight. I drove down the ridge road in the rain with my headlights cutting through the trees, each turn of the gravel drive bringing the gate closer and the past with it. From the house, Caroline had looked like a figure on a monitor, small and blue under security lights. Up close, she looked painfully real. Her beige coat was soaked at the shoulders, her hair clung to her face, and the confidence she once wore like jewelry was gone. She stood on the outside of the black steel gate with both hands wrapped around the bars, not shaking them, not trying to force anything, just holding on because there was nothing else left to hold. I parked on my side and stepped out under an umbrella. The gate stood between us, wet and dark, the kind of boundary you do not notice until someone you used to love cannot cross it. Caroline looked at me through the bars. You came down, she said. I said I would. My voice sounded calm, but calm is not the same as untouched. Rain tapped against the umbrella, the gate, the hood of her rented car idling behind her. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. She looked past me toward the road curling up to the house, trying to see what the article had not shown. Is it beautiful? She asked. I knew what she meant. The house. The life. The version of me she had not been invited to judge. Yes, I said. It is quiet. That answer seemed to hurt her more than if I had bragged. I used to think quiet meant small, she whispered. I know. She wiped rain from her cheek with the back of her hand. Adam, I do not expect you to forgive me tonight. Good. Her mouth tightened, but she nodded. I deserve that. I looked at her carefully. The Caroline I remembered would have turned deserving into a performance. This one only stood there, soaked and exhausted, with no room to perform for except the man she once threw away. What do you want from me? I asked. She looked down at the gravel. A chance to prove I am not that person anymore. You came here because Preston left, your listings slowed down, and you saw my name on something people respect. She flinched, but did not deny it. That is part of why I came, she said. I hate that it is part of why I came. But it is not all of it. Honest again. Late again. I held the umbrella lower as wind pushed rain across my face. The problem is, Caroline, you did not just leave me. You rewrote me. You made me the symbol of everything you thought was beneath you, so you could feel brave walking away. Then when the world stopped rewarding that story, you drove here asking to come home. Tears mixed with rain on her face. I know, she said, and I cannot undo it. No, I said. You cannot. The gate lights hummed softly above us. Behind her, the rented car's engine clicked. Behind me, the ridge road curved toward a house she had not earned the right to enter. Can I at least see it? She asked. Not tonight. Her eyes closed. For the first time, she did not argue. I reached through the bars and handed her the umbrella. She stared at it, then at me, hope flashing for one fragile second. I did not let that hope become a lie. Take it, I said. Drive home safely. Call me next week if you still want to apologize when there is no rain, no article, no midnight panic, and no gate making the moment feel dramatic. She took the umbrella with both hands. Her fingers brushed mine through the steel, and for a second I remembered the porch, the paint cans, the cheap champagne, the woman who once believed broken places could be made possible. Then I stepped back. The gate did not move. Caroline stood outside the gate holding my umbrella like it was something fragile, something she had not expected to be given after everything she had taken for granted. For one quiet second, the rain softened around us, and I saw both versions of her at once. The woman who had called me her regret in a kitchen I built, and the woman who now stood outside a life she could no longer enter by crying. That was the cruelest part of endings. They do not erase love. They only teach love where it is no longer safe to. Live. Next week? She asked, voice small beneath the rain. If you still mean it, I said. If you want to apologize without needing the gate to open first. She looked past me again, toward the curve of the driveway and the warm lights hidden in the trees. I could feel the question forming before she asked it. Was there someone else inside? Was I happy? Was the house really mine in the way the old one had never been after she turned it into a brand? But she did not ask. Maybe some part of her finally understood that not every room in my life was hers to inspect. She nodded, slowly, and took one step back from the bars. I did love you, she said. The words came late. Too late to rescue the night. But not so late they meant nothing. I held her eyes through the black steel. I know, I said. That is why what you said broke more than a marriage. Her face tightened, and she looked down at the gravel. I was wrong to call you that. I waited. Rain slid from the edge of my coat. The gate lights hummed. Far up the hill, the house stood quiet, not watching, not needing me to perform mercy to prove I was good. Caroline swallowed. You were not my regret, Adam. You were the part of my life I did not know how to value until I lost the right to reach for it. The sentence hurt because it was the one I had needed 2 years ago. But healing has a terrible sense of timing. It gives people wisdom after the wound has already become a scar. Thank you for saying that, I said. Her eyes lifted, hopeful and afraid. Does it change anything? I looked at the closed gate between us. Matte black steel. Rain on iron. A boundary drawn by my own hand after years of leaving doors open for people who confused access with love. It changes the truth, I said. It does not change the gate. She closed her eyes, and this time she did not argue. That was the first respectful thing she had done all night. I stepped back toward my truck. Go home, Caroline. I do not know where that is anymore, she whispered. I paused with my hand on the door. Then start by finding somewhere that does not depend on being let back into mine. The words were not cruel. They were clean. She held the umbrella tighter, nodded once, and walked back to the rented car. I watched until she got inside, until the headlights turned slowly away from Whitaker Ridge, until the red taillights disappeared down the wet road like the last sentence of a story I had finally stopped rewriting. Then I drove back up the hill. The house waited at the end of the curved driveway, stone and cedar glowing softly against the rain, quiet in a way the old house had never been after love became negotiation. Inside, I left my wet coat by the door and stood for a moment in the main room, listening to the roof, the trees, the steady sound of a life that did not need to be explained to anyone. On the desk in my studio lay the first sketch I had made of the gate 2 years earlier. I had drawn it the week Caroline called me her biggest regret. Back then, I thought I was designing a barrier to keep pain out. I understood now that I had built something better. A threshold, a place where apology could arrive, but not command entry. A place where love could be remembered without being obeyed. At 1:06 in the morning, the gate camera went dark. The rain kept falling, and I turned off the studio lights. Caroline had begged to come home. But for the first time in years, home was not a place she got to define.